Welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja. And today I'll briefly talk about the need to be comparative. What do I mean by that? So, this need to develop our modes of thinking about ourselves, but also about the world and about our fields of study in comparative terms. Now, being comparative comes natural to us. Now, if you've read your Lacan or Freud, if you know about the mirror stage, our first idea of self always comes to us as this disembodied self that we see in the mirror. Now, the idea is to build on that. As we develop, as we are trained or socialized, we tend to develop this idea as if we have a centered self and that what we believe in or what we agree with in the world comes from within. I mean, it's a fiction that we all live by. But most of the times, our idea of self or who we are and our wealth comes from outside of us through recognition, right? So being comparative helps us locate our own self in the world in comparison to others. What that then privileges is not just seeking the recognition of the others or seeking stability of our identity from the others, which is psychologically crucial, but to acknowledge that there can be more ways of looking at things than the one that we have internalized or practiced and the one that we deem normative and the only way of looking at the world. Now, this intent on comparison or attempts at being comparative is really important in academic work, in literary studies, for example. Because if we just approach a text from whatever our own personal prejudices, preferences, or assumptions are, then all we are doing is reducing a text to the level of our own expectations. But if we put our reading practices in comparative mode, then it will, in a way, motivate us to look at the same text from our own socially constructed perspectives, but also from the place of the so-called other, how others might read it, might respond to it, and might understand it and consume it. And that's absolutely crucial to do the kind of transformative work that I've always encouraged on this channel in literary studies, in post-colonial studies. Being comparative in thinking of ourselves, but also being comparative in engaging with literary texts. Now, the field of study, of course, that does this most effectively and as a discipline is comparative literature. Okay, not worrying much about its origins as a Eurocentric approach to literary studies, but by and large, what it forces its practitioners is to develop a mode of engaging with the text which does not just rely on one literary tradition or one language. So traditionally, the comparatists, of course, are supposed to at least know native level knowledge and have proficiency of at least two languages. And when they study literatures in those two languages, what they are then doing is reading literature comparatively. So if you're reading a novel in English, you would also be aware of the development of the novel in German, how it is thought in German, how it is written or published in German. You could expand that, as Spivak had recommended, into other languages, novelistic tradition, in Hindi, in Urdu, right, in many of African languages. But being comparative is crucial to becoming the kind of scholars who are not just driven by their own personal or socialized preferences and prejudices. In real life, being comparative can be a deeply, deeply transformative practice. For example, how many of you, especially if you grew up in Pakistan, heard your mothers say when you were little, don't complain too much about what you do not have. Look around yourselves. There are people who don't have what you have. What was that all about? It was about encouraging us as children to think about the world in comparative terms, to accomplish two things, right? One, to learn how privileged we ourselves are, but also maybe in the process to realize that there are people in the world who may not have the same privileges as we do, and maybe we need to be there to help them. We need to be there to be a source of solace and sympathy and empathy for them. So being comparative doesn't just make us good scholars or enables us to do the kind of transformative work that can keep an eye on more than one way of looking at things. It can also end up making us more empathetic, democratic, and egalitarian human beings. So the reason I keep emphasizing comparative approach in postcolonial studies is because I've noticed in some works and some thought processes by students, let's say from India or Pakistan, where they just assume that by completely doing away with any kind of Western influences, theory, or praxis, if they can just develop a purely nativist way of looking at texts, they will somehow undo the power of metropolitan cultures, which is an important way of looking at it. But what that then does is it entraps you within the localized histories, and the ramifications of that is that then you're only looking at the world from what you think is your own perspective, which can be very limiting, right? In terms of your scholarship, but very limiting in terms of the transformative impact of your work. Instead, if we keep our work comparative, if we retrieve knowledges from our own cultures, right? What Foucault calls buried or bruised knowledges, and then juxtapose them with mainstream history, comparatively speaking, then what we will be accomplishing is not just a retrieval and articulation and recuperation of our own traditions, but also a complicating of the dominant strains of knowledge with our own knowledge. And that can only be done with a comparative approach. So, just to sum up, in scholarly work, especially in post-colonial studies, but also in literary studies, being comparative encourages us to not just look at a text or a situation from our own situated positionality, but rather it encourages us to look at the text from our own perspective, but also to seek out other perspectives and other modes of thinking through which the text can be read. In human relational terms, then, it makes our worldview more empathetic, more egalitarian, more open to different ways of looking at the same set of facts and same sets of actions. So that's all for today. I hope this is useful to you. Just let me know what you think. And as always, please do subscribe to the channel so that you get timely notifications. I will now be back with some other topic at some other time. Until then, stay safe, take care of each other, and as always, from me to you, peace and love.